You may have come across the term Gretna Green while searching for marriage records in your family tree. Well, in today's genealogy gem, professional genealogist Mark Lowe is here to tell us what that is, why it matters, and how it may have affected your ability to find your ancestors' marriage records. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be here with you. It's good to be with you again sometime in person. I feel like we're right here side by side today. That's great.
I know. We'll just pretend it's in person and it's side by side. Tell everybody, Where are you coming to us from?
I'm in Springfield, Tennessee, which is just north of Nashville, and I'm about 10 miles from Kentucky that way.
Wow. Nashville is definitely on my list. Guess what I started doing at Christmas? I started learning how to play the mandolin. And there's some amazing mandolin shop I've heard in Nashville. So I need to come to your neck of the woods.
Some great ones, some handmade good makers. I have brothers who are both kind of musicians too, and both are mandolin players. So I'm pretty sure I could call that brother and say, "Hey, she's talking about a shop. Which one should she go to?" He'll know. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to put that on our list. We have so much in common, and I think one of the biggest things, of course, is genealogy. And I think most folks watching probably have seen you at some point. Tell everybody how long you've been doing genealogy. When did all this start for you?
Oh, my goodness. Wow. I'm getting old enough now that I could forget some of that. But no, I realistically started when I was about 7 years old. Not doing the same kind of work, not professionally, that sort of thing. But I got interested. I lost my paternal grandmother. And so with her loss, there were questions that I needed answers to. And I would ask my dad, and he knew lots of stuff, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know everything I wanted to know, including like where everybody was married or that sort of thing. And I had an interest in that. So I got interested. He took me to, he had a couple of aunts who were in the DAR and were interested a little bit. And he took me to visit one of those who took me to the county court clerk's office up in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And Mr. Oval Motley was the clerk at that point. And he was willing to work with a 7-year-old. And so he took me into the bowels of the courthouse and let me unfold marriage records, since we're going to talk. And he made me explain to him, now, do you understand this? And I transcribed. Remember those great big, the pencils that we used in first and second grade, those great big ones the size of your thumb? Yeah. Okay. He had me transcribe whatever I was looking at and then tell him what it meant. Or if I didn't know, he would explain to me. Now, I still had a 7-year-old mind, and I was loving it, and I was learning it. And he said to me, do you see where the story goes? And he said, the story of your family and every other family who passed through this area are in these records. And he said, so if you learn how to listen to that story, you can hear what happened to them then. And I was hooked.
I can imagine. Oh my gosh. What an amazing.
What a great experience.
Wonderful that he spoke to a 7-year-old like that and didn't underestimate, your interest or your capability. You've got me beat by a year because I think I was 8. And I always tell people I was the only kid in grade school using her allowance to buy death certificates. I was so obsessed. But my grandmother hadn't passed. But like the gentleman that you met at the courthouse, when I asked her during a visit over the summer vacation, who are these people in your scrapbooks? I don't recognize them. Why do you have strangers? You're my grandma. And she says, that's my family. And she stopped everything and sat down with me and answered questions and wrote things down. And it's just that love and attention of an adult who's willing to talk to you about it, right? I mean, what a difference that makes for a kid.
Yeah, it really does. I think the same thing there. My grandmother, when she was living, was someone who would give you attention. And I would make up homework because I was not yet in school when she would come and stay with us. And she would help my older brothers and sisters with homework. And so I would say, Mama Lowe, I have homework too. And she would, do what you say. And we would go through something, whatever I had made up to go with and go through. And I think that was what, there was such a loss in part of that. And so I think doing the research often about her family and those folks that I'd heard her talk about helped me feel like she was there again, telling me those stories.
Yeah. And you get to uncover another connection to those beloved relatives that we knew. I still feel that way. I think when I find people, I think, Grandma, I got one. I tell her, it's like, it's exciting to know that we have that ongoing connection. Well, you just barely touched on.
I actually keep her picture. Her picture's just right there, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So I
can
can
you show
see
us?
that grandmother.
Oh, you can always see her.
I'll have to get it because I can't reach it from where we are. But
good. You send me a picture. We'll put it on our video.
You know what? I've got a picture. I'll show you my grandmother in just a minute. I've
Awesome.
got one. I'll show you.
So you called her Mama Lowe?
Mama Lowe, yes.
Very cool.
That was my dad's mom.
Yeah.
And my other grandmother was just Granny.
Just Granny. See, mine were always Grandma, Burkett, Grandma, or she'd say, call me grandmother. Grandmother Moore. But I had a listener one time. She wrote me an email and she said, I had Grandma Blue, Grandma Green, and it was what color their house was. Isn't that cute?
Oh,
Very
that is
cute.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard some really cute names over the time period with different folks. I think that's kind of neat. It's neat. It makes it very personal.
It does. I'm Shasha. Yeah. And that was from my oldest grandson who called me Shasha because he couldn't say grandma. But my husband is Bumpa, and Bumpa goes back generations back to England. Yeah. So, well, we're going to talk about something else that's going to take us back generations, and that's marriage records. And I know that you teach a lot on this subject and kind of blend it in with this concept of Gretna Green. And that's what we really wanted to explore today was, I know I've heard of Gretna Green as being a place in Scotland, but you really help explain to people how this applies even to those of us in the U.S., or we have listeners, obviously, from many other countries, Australia and Canada and other places. So I'd love to jump into that. What would you like to do? Should we start with you talking a little bit about Gretna Green, or do you have slides you want to show us?
Well, I've got some slides. I think we can do a little bit together both ways.
Awesome.
So let me explain a little bit what Gretna Green is by doing that. So there really is a Gretna Green. And as you mentioned, it is in Scotland. And the reason that it became, quote, famous and applies to all these information to us about marriages that aren't in your home county or in your home location is that England's marriage laws were more rigid. And many couples found out that they could just cross the border over into Scotland and they could get married much quicker, much easier, without the same restrictions. And it became so well known as people shared it with one another, then they went to this little community. It really is a community called Gretna Green. And so the marriage registers for those are available. So if you actually have family who went to, quote, the Gretna Green in Scotland, they are a database that's available both on Family Search and Ancestry, and you can search those. It became so famous that there is an anvil, like a blacksmith anvil there, and it seems to me often the story would go that they would go there to say they wanted to get married. So it was kind of a central place in the community. And it was just a situation that was close to get to, was not far away, where folks could just cross the border, go to Gretna Green. They would get married in that location and then return home. So it became kind of synonymous with the information of going somewhere else to get married. And as we know in the States, there's been lots of, quote, famous areas where people wanted to get married, not always just because of marriage laws, like often that would be going to Niagara Falls. You know, a lot of folks went to Niagara Falls either on their honeymoon or in many days earlier to get married. It became a destination. And so the Gretna Greens are more not those necessarily romantic locations, but where perhaps the law is easier. And in fact, let's look at some of those reasons. That may be the perfect kind of transition there. I think the biggest one for most of our families are age requirements. And, that still applies today. I'll show, when we talk about my grandparents, that was the first one I wanted to find. So there I was in that courthouse where I thought that's where they would have gotten married. That's where they lived. There was no marriage record for my grandparents there in Kentucky. And so we're going to find out that could have been age requirements. In some states, there's a waiting period. So even though we could go get a license, it might be 2, 3, sometimes 5 days, or sometimes a week before the couple could actually get married. And for many folks, that was just, that's too long. With the 20th century in particular, we began to add some medical test. And in many states today, there still is a blood test or various things in regard to advisories and that sort of thing, and that delays the marriage. Even today in this county, several years ago, even though Tennessee required a blood test, there was a lab that was set up just across from the courthouse who could get your blood test done in one day. And so we became kind of a Gretna Green for even other counties, because you could come here, get your blood test, and get married in the same day. That wasn't true in other places. So that's another reason. Sometimes it's the cost of the license, or specific restrictions to clauses. Sometimes, besides age, there would be where you would have to have the proof of good conduct. Somebody had to actually, in some states, say that they knew you and that you would stand up for a good marriage and that you were of good conduct and that sort of thing. And in some cases, that would have prevented folks from going to a particular area. Certainly, near state lines and that sort of thing, people want to have a party at their wedding. Perhaps you live in a dry county. I grew up in a dry county. It's a dry. So if you wanted to have alcohol or a party, then you would go somewhere else to get married. And for many folks, going away is an important situation. So they might hop on the train, or certainly, hopefully, love and marriage and the whole idea of, we want to get married somewhere special. They would do that. So I mentioned Niagara Falls. One of the other big areas where people went, if it was a destination wedding, was Mammoth Cave. They wanted to go down in the cave. And particularly after the Civil War in the 1870s and 1880s, there were many folks who would come down to Kentucky and put on these, instead of this fancy dress, they would have on a fancy dress, but they would cover it with some kind of coveralls. They had some special things, because they had to crawl into the cave, and then they would get married and try to take some pictures. And so that would be a reason. It's not quite the same way for age, etc., but it would be a way to someplace special, and that's often what we're looking, what some folks are looking for.
It sounds like something kind of becomes a Gretna Green when word gets out. Word gets out, there's an advantage to going there versus going here. I think about, all the old movies. They would go to Reno if they were going to get a divorce. That's kind of the opposite Gretna Green, isn't it?
It is, but it's the same. It's exactly the same
Same
thing.
concept.
People, they get excited and would tell the information. So yes, you can go there and a divorce can be quickly. Same thing. And it's amazing how the word got out about certain squires or JPs who, if we watched Andy Griffith growing up, people would come to the JP and get married. Researchers like you and I, we've looked at these records and we think, wait, the record would have to be created in that place. And in some areas, the ease at which a JP could create a license, where you didn't have to go to the county seat, you could get married in that area with that JP. You could do everything right there. That certainly would have sped up the situation of having to go in a big city in a long line and wait to be seen and go through the information. So that's certainly the reasons that they existed and still exist today. By the way, they still do exist. So,
well, I imagine if a town or a city wanted to encourage people to come and kind of bring their filing fees with them, they would create such a scenario where it's really easy and they get that word out too, right?
Sounds like a tourism opportunity.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, come and get married here. We'll make it work. Yeah. And there are, by the way, if you go look for that, you're going to find that exists, certainly. That there are wedding chapels around the corner in certain cities, just waiting for the opportunity. So how did we look? Like, for example, my grandparents would have gotten married right after World War One. Okay, so I could see that they were married, but depending on the time period and where you are, if you're in the States, for example, and there are records like this, there are agencies like this, certainly around the world in virtually every country. And so this is a book of marriage statistics that's compiled by the Bureau of Census. Now, we're used to looking at their population counts and that sort of thing. But this is a marriage and divorce report. They put one out probably starting in the 1860s and continuing through today, actually. But they're available on, this is one of the ones on Google Books, and it's a marriage statistics report. So they don't always have the marriage statistics report in every annual report. But if you'll go through looking through these, they're available on Google Books. They're available on HathiTrust. I'll show you a HathiTrust one, example 2 here. But this is the 1922 report. And it may be kind of tough to see, but you'll see these are the counties where the marriage rate is higher than the state marriage rate. So, for example, if you were looking across at West Virginia, which is the very last one on the right, okay, and it only has one county listed, it's Brooke County. Okay, Brooke County has a marriage rate higher than every other county in West Virginia. And if you were to look at a map, which that's always the next thing, is pull a map up at the same time you're doing this and look. If you look at Brooke County, West Virginia has that little lip that fits up between Ohio and Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Just that one little bit with just a couple of counties right there. So Brooke County actually is in West Virginia and lays right between Ohio to its west and Pennsylvania to the east. Ohio's laws and Pennsylvania laws were more stringent than West Virginia's law. So Brooke County was a popular destination. Number one, it's close. And so many couples from Pennsylvania and Ohio, and sometimes folks who married somebody from Ohio would meet in West Virginia and have the marriage. So this statistical data kind of helps you predict an idea. So if you have somebody you don't know, you can't find their marriage, you could start with the aspect of what was the law in the time period and what counties had a higher rate nearby. And so you could look at these counties and see. I think that the next step probably for me is to take that one step further. Besides the statistics, is try to figure out now which was the cause that led that. So this is the same kind of book. I think this is the 1909 edition, and this one's on HathiTrust. But that's the catalog record. So if you go to that record, on HathiTrust, sometimes then there's lots of years are listed. And so you can actually look based on the time period that you're looking for. And it also is going to relate to other records. So if you're interested in the laws for other countries, they're often included in some of this book of the U.S. Census because it's showing us what's the comparable laws in France or Germany or Spain. They're in the same book. So you don't have to go look necessarily outside of those. You can actually use these same tools for that. So let me give you an example. Why you would be looking in this case. And so within that, it has the laws for the states at the time, that are in place at the time of the publication. So remember, this is the 1909 edition. So I just pulled up the requirements for Kentucky and Tennessee because, number one, here I'm sitting right here and Kentucky's just up there. But this is one of the reasons when I'm looking at my grandparents who were living in Kentucky, why would they possibly go somewhere else? And so this is the age before a parental consent is required. In Kentucky, you had to be 21. In Tennessee at that point, you only had to be 16.
Wow.
And so that's a 5 year significant difference right there, don't you think? That would be, you can imagine that would have had a lot of people who would have thought, wait a minute, we're 18, we want to get married, we've got to have parental consent. And if that were the case, if you were, your parents were all for in that situation, then you could still do that. But if there was some question, then in Tennessee that wasn't required, 16. In fact, before 1899, it mentions right in this fact that was put into place that you had to be 16. Before that, there wasn't a specific written consent level, and so the statute varied and it was open. So that could even been more situations. So we know, those of us who research in Kentucky, for example, we understand the process that people who lived the northern part of the Kentucky, they crossed over to Indiana because it was lower there, and the folks on the southern border, which is Tennessee, they crossed over into the northern Tennessee counties and got married because it would have been easier. So with that in mind, you want to look at the laws that are in place. And one of my favorite places to do that in regard to quick laws, I can always go look up at the statutes for the various states. But one of the great summaries, Cornell Law School has a marriage laws of the 50 states. And there's the link. That's part of their Legal Information Institute, and they've got it by state. And then you can actually refer to the details, and it helps you see the changes over time. So it'll tell you kind of what the current marriage law is, but it'll help you see the changes in the past decades. And I think that's helpful for us to know, number one, what was the law in place when your great aunt and uncle got married and you're trying to find where they were married. So that's a great tool.
Absolutely. I was thinking about how you specialize in your professional research, and many people who do it as a hobby don't necessarily specialize, but the advantage is it really probably drives home for you as a professional. You've got to know all that context, right? And that's a strategy that all of us can use. We don't have to be doing client work to take the time to get these kinds of resources. This is brilliant.
Yeah, because that is the question. Sometimes, and I think that's the one area that we can help. Sometimes is that people will say, where do you find that? Well, because you've already found it. So I think it's when we share that, hey, wait, this is a resource I would use wherever I was.
Yeah.
It's a great, and I think I've shared kind of 3 places there that would help you quickly without, getting into anything complicated, what the major situations are. And by the way, it would mention in the Census Bureau summary of laws, it would mention if it required blood tests at a certain time period, what the tests were. It would indicate if there were special bonds and all. So in regard to all those other reasons that folks might have gone to another location, those are in some of these summaries. So if it's not just an age thing, it's got lots of other reasons. So again, it helps to know where to look. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we often, my grandparents, I couldn't ask her at that point, like, where'd y'all get married? I did look in the newspaper. Sometimes that will report, but it just indicated their marriage. It did not indicate like where they went to get married. Mm-hmm. It didn't state. And I did find that in some other folks that I've looked, in the newspaper account, it indicated that they went to a certain place, or perhaps it was solemnized with the justice of the peace, and maybe the name was included. So I would always do those newspaper searches and the reasons to find it. But rumors often the best possibility. Somebody will say, I think they ran off to so and so. And occasionally that does pan out, that people went pretty far to get married. And I always remind myself, and this is kind of a tool I think we all use too, I always want to make sure that I'm looking in the right county, in the right county boundaries. And I love this tool. I know we all probably use this one. This is the Atlas for Historical County Boundaries. at the Newberry Library in Chicago. But I'm going to, based on the time period, if I had grandparents who married in 1860 in a certain county, I want to know what the county boundary was, because maybe the county wasn't even created. So maybe they were living in another place, and that's where the marriage is, and those kind of things. So it's always wise to make sure we're looking at the same information and consistent across time. And I can easily get confused. I try not to, but I easily can get more in my head than I can.
I know that a lot of people who are beginners in genealogy don't always realize that you don't always go to the current county seat. That what you were just showing there with that interactive map was the chance to be able to pick a point in time and see where the boundaries were at that time, because that's where you go search today. I think, and it's one of those things, until somebody tells you, you don't really know when you're new into genealogy. So that's a great tool.
Well, that's true. Well, I'll kind of show you my mistakes from the beginning then as we look at this.
In our next video, Mark Lowe will be back with a terrific case study, which is going to take our new understanding of Gretna Green and show us how to use it to our advantage to find elusive marriage records in our family tree. If you want to be notified of the premiere and live chat for that video, be sure to click the subscribe button so you can add us to your favorites list. We have new videos coming out all the time, all of them designed to help you find your family history and have a lot more fun doing it. And I hope you'll visit me at my website, genealogygems.com. There you can sign up for the free email newsletter and you get a free bonus download. So look for that with your first email. And of course, we have our premium membership with all my video classes and downloadable handouts and all the goodies that come with that. Plus, at the website, you will find show notes for this episode. I'll have links for everything down in the video description. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.